Hello.
Hello.
Isn't this strange? Look at us. We've got cameras. We're on a screen. It's very odd, isn't it? But we're back. We're going to be doing a couple of series of podcasts, and we've decided to hit you with visual as well as audio, because why not?
Because we're so beautiful.
Yeah. Well.
Carry on, Lucy.
Can't agree. It's me, Lucy Compton, senior paralegal at Wright Hassel in the family team, joined by Richard Dundee, who is a partner in our wills, trusts, tax, probate, everything to do with that sphere team. Yeah. And Peter Lowe, senior partner in the family team also. And we're going to talk a bit about death and divorce and what that means. We're going to have 2 episodes in this sort of related subject. So we've got some notes, but we're free flowing. This is all new to us, doing it this way. So yeah, people watching will have to bear with us. But I guess, so I'm going to start with a question, Richard, for you. That if you're going through divorce, how does that affect my need to plan for the future? And I should just say that before you answer, that I'm basically going to sit here, ask questions as we go along, maybe that people watching might be thinking that they would like to ask, or something hopefully insightful for you to answer.
Absolutely.
How would that impact my need to plan for the future?
That's a good question. I think to sort of not avoid your question, but to start off with a slightly different question, is that everybody should plan. It doesn't matter if you're divorcing or otherwise. Everyone needs a plan, and the most important thing that you can put into place, I think we'll all agree, is a will. Most important document you can prepare in your life. A divorce changes what you might want your will to say, which kind of answers your question, Lucy, and we'll talk about the implications of that during this podcast. The idea behind a will is you saying, this is what I've got, these are the people I trust, and this is where I want it to go. Now, the effect of a divorce is effectively that your spouse, if you've named them in your will be treated as having died before you. So they're ripped out, as you'd expect. Yeah. The risk is that you make a will, you're going through a divorce proceedings, a process, with us or other firms, and that person or you pass away before the process is finalised. So there is always a risky period between starting proceedings and finishing proceedings that your will still be in effect in its current form. So we need to make sure, and a client should always make sure when they start proceedings that their will's up to scratch. Yeah. They need to get it out the safe, have a good look at it and go, right, if I was to pass away today, is this will that I made 20 years ago when I was happily married with rose-tinted glasses, is it still going to work for me and for my family? We find a lot of clients, 99% of our married clients, still make simple wills that leave everything to each other. And they will agree amongst themselves that if one of us goes first, when the second passes, so when the first of us goes, we'll leave it all to each other. Then when the second passes, we'll leave it to the kids. Now, Peter, I think you'll back me up here when we're saying, there's an awful lot of second, third marriages nowadays.
Yeah, families are much more complex than they were, and the planning around that has to be more complex and to take that into account. There's an awful lot of consideration in virtually every client that we meet that has some very different, very personal circumstances that you need to sit and work through with them. That's very true.
Absolutely. And when I sit down with a client who comes to me with children of their own, and they've married again, and they've brought their own children to the combined mixed sort of family setup, it might be that they agree at the point of marriage that they will make wills together, joint wills that split the combined estate between the 2 sets of family, which is very, very common. It's a gentleman's agreement almost. I'll do this if you do that in your will. Yeah. Now, when that relationship breaks down, if your will still says, well, when I die, I'm going to leave it half to your family and half to my family, that might no longer be what you want. It might no longer be what your ex-wife is going to do. or your soon-to-be ex-wife is going to do. So what you ought to do is reconsider, ultimately. If you're going through divorce proceedings, if anything's happening, it's sitting down and looking at your estate plan and going, if I die today, do I really want it going to that person over there?
Yeah. Is there a time that people should make these plans? Should you make a will even if you're not married, or is there a time that people should be doing it, or is it just a do it whenever to make sure you've got one?
Yeah, as soon as you turn 18, but try and tell an 18-year-old that they should make a will.
Well, they live forever.
Well,
they live forever. So how can you plan a will if you go?
I'm going to live forever.
I hate to break it to you, Richard. But
it's almost a little bit like what we would say to a client about having a prenup, in the sense of it's not just if you're rich that you need to have a prenup. I suppose it's the same for a will.
Absolutely. It's the one thing I can guarantee: you're going to die at some point. It's miserable. It's a horrible thought. But I'm sorry, I'm bringing this down.
This is
a bit light, Richard.
It's a bit heavy for a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, it is. I haven't had enough coffee. But ultimately, it's going to happen at some point. So everyone should make a will, be that 18, 80, 102. You're rich, you're poor, whatever it might be. We all have something, even if it's clothes on our back. What divorce does, what a relationship breakdown does, because it's not just divorce, it's I live with a partner and we've got a really good thing going and we've all agreed what will happen. If that split happens, you need to reconsider what your will says, because once again, guaranteed you're going to pass away. Now, we tell our clients to review at life-changing events.
I think that's the point, Richard. I think you're exactly right. Divorce is a life-changing event.
It is.
It causes taking stock of what you have and how that's going to provide for your future, for your future needs. So the planning that we would do as divorce lawyers dovetails perfectly with the kind of planning that you're articulating here that needs to be done for people, and it's a perfect time in which to do it, because as matrimonial lawyers, we're looking at people's income, we're looking at people's capital, people's pensions. All of these things you need to give some consideration to, and of course divorce itself is a change in circumstance, but there are other events that can happen either as you're going through that process or at the end of that process. The reality is that life is not certain, and it's one of the pieces of planning that you can put in place that once you start to do it, things emerge that you didn't even think about. So to take your example of a younger person thinking about a will, very often when we go through divorce, they haven't got a lot of assets, but they may have something like a 4 times salary, insurance as part of their package of employment.
Absolutely.
And that suddenly becomes, okay, they want 50,000 a year, something that's a £200,000 pot to divide and to decide who gets that. And that's a really substantial amount of money. And it's the same for people with rights under pensions, which accumulate over a period of time.
And we find, because part of the process of making an estate plan is sitting down and running that exercise, Peter. It's saying, what do you have? And it's always surprising to me that people don't realise that they have assets. Everybody likes to think, or a lot of clients like to think that they have nothing. But when you put it down on paper, actually, well, look at that, my estate is quite significant. And it's the life insurances, the death in services, the pensions. And, on top of discovering that they have an awful lot that, needs to go somewhere, we find a lot of people with life insurance policies as well will have taken them out 30 years ago, made a nomination, and I'm one of those people. I took out a life policy a long time ago, before I was married and before I had kids, and I nominated my sister to be the beneficiary of that policy. Now, if Sammy, if you're listening, sorry you're not getting it anymore. I've taken my own advice, but the point is people don't. They forget. That's why you need to keep it.
Or it's one of those things, isn't it? I'll do it later.
Absolutely,
I'll do it later
because I'm not going to die. So I've got loads of time. And it's these life-changing events, it's illness, it's matrimonial breakdown, it's relationship split that focuses people's minds. And what we're saying, I suppose, is you need to keep your plan under constant review.
Right.
So it's not a rush to get it sorted when the time comes, because there's so many things that you're thinking about at that particular moment. The last thing you want to be doing is sitting down and thinking, right, what's going to happen when I go? Really important, but it's low on the list of priorities.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of recognition sometimes, not only about what's in the pot as it is now, but the fact that going forward from a divorce or the relationship breakdown, very often you've got an insurable interest. So if you have a maintenance award, well, that maintenance dies if the person who's paying it dies. But that's an insurable interest.
Yeah.
It's something which is part of your planning and discussions with the other party. Yeah. You can agree to insure those insurance payments, even if it's on a decreasing basis. So, you know, the insurance gets less every year as the children get older. You can do it for covering mortgages and other debts that might exist. The relationship between you still continues because you had a relationship in law that comes to an end, but you've still very often got a relationship that allows a financial relationship that you need to take care of and that you need to protect. So it's not only what there is in the pot at the moment, it's what are you likely to need and how can we provide for that in the best in the future.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the overall planning. And of course future planning is exactly what Richard's talking about with estate planning and what the outcomes of that would be.
See, it's really important to sit down, talk about it with somebody, and get a plan in order. We find, and I'm sure you find in family as well, that a lot of married couples own property. Yeah. You know, I know it's big news at the moment with the lack of housing, but the reality is a lot of married couples own things together. So jointly owned property, jointly owned bank accounts, jointly owned businesses as well. We come across an awful lot of married couples or people in partnerships that own stock and shares in family investment companies or others. You know, what we need to think about and what clients need to think about is, well, what happens if the financial order hasn't been sorted and I die before an agreement has been made? Will my will sort it? As an example, I may own a property with my wife, and I can own a property jointly with my wife in two different ways. Now, I'm not going to bore you all with the intricacies of it.
Richard, please.
Don't, absolutely. No. I bore my team and my wife repeatedly. I'm not going to bore you. But if you own it one way, then it doesn't matter if I've changed my will to leave it all to my children or to my other loved ones. If I pass away without the divorce being finalised and I own my property as joint tenants, then it's going to go to my spouse, come rain or shine. So if I don't want that to happen, if I want to make a new will that leaves it to my children or whatever it might be, then I need to make sure I own the assets correctly. So it's not as simple as nipping down to your local solicitor and changing your will. You've got to look at what you own and how you own it. So it's a holistic sort of look at what you have, how you own those assets, and how do we make sure that they go to the right people. The will is just one part of it. Yeah,
undoubtedly. And you know, there may be people thinking, well, this is a relatively short time frame that we're talking about during the breakdown of a relationship or the end of a marriage. But it's not. I mean, the reality of most settlements is that they endure for a long time.
Absolutely.
And that leaves very often one person financially at risk or financially vulnerable. You know, if you've got young children when you do this, then you've got a 15, 20-year commitment.
Absolutely.
This is an enormous commitment. So, you know, the prospect of somebody dying within the 6 months it takes to get a divorce, relatively low. The prospect over a 20-year period increases significantly. And that obligation needs to be protected, and the protection happens through proper planning.
Agreed.
So that when that, and if, God forbid, that event ever happened, in exactly the same way as you take out insurance if your house burned down, this planning needs to be put in place. But I think it's a bit of a fallacy. People tend to box it as, I'm getting divorced, it's a short-term thing, then everything will be okay. Well, the reality for most people is that extends for a much longer period. You've changed your relationship with your former partner, but if you've got children and family and stepchildren, etc., that relationship continues. And that's the kind of protection that we're talking about over a bit of different period.
Absolutely. And it would be nice, wouldn't it, if divorces could be done in 6 months and you cut ties and walk away. But it's different. It leaves people, what we always try and get across is that it's just a different relationship. It is.
it's not, if you're no other connections, no other family, but for the majority of people, even if they don't have children, there is relationships that they built up over a period of time with, the siblings of their partner, the parents of their partner, the aunts and uncles of their partner. This doesn't just go away.
No.
But what we're mainly talking about here is family commitment that endures beyond the divorce, and that usually involves children. And the best planning that you undertake is when there are children involved and blended families involved.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to come on to talk about children in a different podcast, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at that
absolutely
as a topic of its own, really.
I agree.
Yeah.
And a really important one, and it's an emotional one as well, because we all want to do best by our children. The reason I was talking about the dream for a divorce to last 6 months is because it might not. So when, as private client lawyers, we sit down with our clients that are going through this scenario, and regularly they tell me, well, I'll just wait. I won't do this now, Richard. I won't consider my will because I'll come back to you when it's all been sorted. It might be that it's all sorted within a short time frame, but it might be that it's not. It might last for a long time before the financial issues are resolved, the relationships are cut. It might be that someone passes away very, very shortly into that process. Yeah. So what we recommend to our clients is they sit down, they get a holding position in place. If you were to pass away today, if that bus, I keep talking about this bus that knocks all
There's a lot of buses that kill a lot of people in your world. There are.
I don't know who's running these buses, but they need to train their drivers.
I'd be on the bus than in the street when you're around.
Absolutely.
You're around.
Someone needs to tip off the police. But if that bus got you, a week into your divorce proceedings, is your will fit for purpose? So we always recommend a temporary will. You can call it whatever you want. It's a will. It needs to be fit for purpose, but it might be temporary until all the financial issues have been resolved, until the dust has settled and you know what the true position is. Then we can sit back down and make a better plan. Then we will know what the tax implications are of divorce, of a matrimonial, of a partnership split, because and it's a podcast in itself talking about the tax implications, but a lot of people will be aware that if you leave assets to your spouse, there's no inheritance tax. If you get divorced, that exemption, that relief, whatever we want to call it, is gone. So the question then is your estate going to pay inheritance tax when you die? And a lot of clients don't realise that they will have to. So can we put good planning in place to protect the children, to mitigate those risks? It's really important that conversation's had.
And it can lead to separate ways of dealing with things.
Absolutely.
For some couples, separation agreements and remaining married may be the better option if they've got significant assets that they want to move around and to plan for, and there's no great imperative to get divorced. They may decide to just live separate lives, and have planning on that basis, but still remain married to one another. I think of Helena Bonham Carter and Tim Burton. I think they have a very similar kind of separate house, separate lives, still married arrangement. Sorry if that's not true anymore, but that's.
I haven't fact checked that. I don't know.
I think a number of people with significant wealth do that in order so they can take advantage of the kind of tax advantages that Richard's talking about, particularly if there's no imperative. They've just grown apart. They're not bothered about bringing the marriage to an end, but they just want to live separate lives while still married.
And I regularly have clients come to me who've been in a partnership, common law marriage. Now I hate using that term because I know, sorry.
We don't like that term.
Doesn't exist.
We don't like that
I know there's no such thing.
But it's incredible, isn't it, how many people think that is a term.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of it comes from film, TV shows, where that might be a thing somewhere else, but it certainly is not here.
Which is the only reason I mention it, not because I think it's true. Sorry, guys. But a lot of people sit down after 60 years of being in this relationship, and the best advice I can give them, if you don't want to pay inheritance tax on your rather large, lofty estate, is get married. It's not romantic. It's a business relationship. That's what it becomes. Now, who knows what the government's going to do in October? Who knows? Inheritance tax is a really emotive subject for lots of reasons. But the point is, at the moment, marriage provides significant benefit for tax on death. Through divorce, however, that benefit disappears rapidly. So you need to sit back down and reconsider how, if I don't want to pay tax, can we mitigate my exposure?
So what some people might be thinking, so I'm in the process of getting divorced. What actually happens if my spouse was to pass away? Does it happen? Is it a thing? I mean, I've been doing this job quite a while now, and it's not a situation I've come across, but there obviously will be people out there who experience that. So what would that look like?
It happened. I've had it happen on a number of occasions, and it's incredibly sad and distressing when that happens, because it's one of the major life events is getting divorced. To put that on top of the death of somebody who's close to you, however you feel about them at the time, is a huge stress, a huge emotional thing to cross. I mean, the reality is that the ONS stats are showing that more and more people are getting married later in life. Stats recently showed a 45% increase in the number of people who over 65 are deciding to get married. And that's the other side of that. Yeah, a 23% increase in the number of over 65s who are getting divorced. So I'm kind of, I'm no statistician, but it seems to me that if more people over 65 are getting married and more are getting divorced, the chances of somebody passing away during the course of the divorce are greater than they would have perhaps been in the past. So, it has important legal consequences. Until a divorce is finalised through a final order, you remain married. So if somebody passed away before there was a final order made, that person, the status would remain as a married person, and you would be entitled to, for example, widow's benefits or widower's benefits under the terms of a pension, and it would have an impact on state pension payments as well. So the change in legal status does have an important effect. If you passed the final order for divorce, well, self-evidently you're not married anymore. But if that's combined with not having got a final financial order, and we know the recent stats on people who decide not to get a financial order are horrendous.
Quite scary.
The number of people who decide not to have a divorce, a pension sharing arrangement is horrendous. The statistics are really high on people who decide not to do that.
About that.
We have. There were some of the earlier, the earlier podcasts.
Some of our earlier ones. Yeah, it's very interesting.
So there are a large number of people who won't have a final financial settlement, and if that happens, when the person dies and they're paying maintenance or providing some support, that comes to an end. And so it leads to you having to make an application to the court under an entirely separate set of legal rules under the Inheritance Act, the 1975 Inheritance Act, which is where it would lead you.
Absolutely, and it's a bit of law that we love to speak about in the private client team. Because it's once again, it's a motive. It arguably restricts testamentary freedom, but it provides a protection for people that have been unfairly or deemed unfairly removed from an inheritance. So we've got, I suppose, two issues here. The first is, if we're going through a divorce and I'm amending my will, seek legal advice, because you want to make your will as watertight as possible to avoid or mitigate your exposure to an Inheritance Act claim. If I simply, this isn't going to happen, I hope, touch wood, my wife's listening, if I was to go through divorce proceedings with her and I change my will immediately to leave everything to my children, if I've not explicitly stated that I've at least thought about provision for my wife, there is an opening there for her to make a claim. Richard was clearly not thinking correctly at the time. I'm going to make an Inheritance Act claim. So good legal advice would be, well, make it clear within your will. Make it clear in an ancillary document, a letter of wishes, why you've done what you've done. And the obvious thing is, I'm going through divorce proceedings. Of course I don't want to make provision for them. I've done alternative provision over here, or it will be sorted out in a final order down the line. The other risk is, if I've not made a will, or I've not amended my will, I'm still leaving assets to my wife. We get that final divorce order, so that my wife is no longer legally entitled under my will, because as I said at the beginning, they are treated as if they've passed away, but we haven't made financial provision. they are then entitled, as Peter says, to make a claim. Now, you might say, well, what's the problem with that? The problem is the cost, the time, the effort, the distress.
Yeah.
Remember, I've still got children over here that have just lost dad. They've gone through the issue of a potential acrimonious divorce, if that's the right word I'm using there, an angry divorce, you might say. And potentially that it could be. And now I've got my wife making a claim against the executors of my estate for financial provision that hasn't been made yet. So we don't like to see them, but the option is there for good reason. And we've got a very good contentious probate team within the firm that deal with these things all the time. But the advice would be to make sure that your estate plan is clear, unambiguous, and that you try and limit your estate's exposure to these potential issues that might crop up.
I think if there is a final financial order already in place post-divorce, then the estate would cover that. They're bound to cover that.
Absolutely.
But the reality, maintenance, for example, child maintenance would die with the person when they die. And that links back to all these threads. All these threads are exactly the same. The insurance thing I discussed a little bit earlier is key in that if that happens. So, one automatically replaces the other on death without having to make claims for it, without having to go to court and get orders for it. It becomes an automatic response, and that provides a lot of continuity and support and help for somebody who may be financially very vulnerable. If you've got a mortgage to pay and you're reliant on maintenance and your partner dies and that maintenance comes to an end, it's no good a lawyer sitting there and saying, I might be able to get you some support in 18 months' time when I've been through an Inheritance Act claim. You'll be out of your home. You need the money now. So the importance of thinking about, okay, what insurance do we need in place to make sure that if that eventuality happens, we can pull it all together and there will be absolute continuity in the payments. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. It's proper, joined up, grown up planning when you're going through this. Not short term, I just need to get out of what I'm in at the moment. And if you pull the threads together properly, then it endures. It endures for a decent length of time, which is exactly what we want in these circumstances.
Absolutely.
Because things will change. New partners will come along. New children will come along that will require review. But you want something that's thought of, those eventualities and do it properly. Exactly.
Absolutely, and I would echo that. Do it properly. If you're going to change your will, if you're going to put a plan in place, if you're going to do some estate planning, do it properly. Invest the time with somebody that does it, that has the ability to, speak to other professionals that are dealing with the issues that you're going through, that can have that joined up, collaborative approach to it. That's how it ought to be. Yeah,
it's really important stuff to get right. Very often people, even on quite short relationships, etc., have substantial assets that they need to sort out. And it's really, something that you just can't ignore. It's got to be done, and it's got to be done properly.
Perfect. I think that's really interesting. For someone who sat here not knowing very much about wills, and in the younger part of her life, I think it's a really important thing to think about and remember. Is there any other thoughts from you two about the subject?
Of course, you've got a will, Lucy. Absolutely.
Ooh, come back to me.
Just by way of anecdote, about 5, maybe a bit longer than that, 5 years ago, we did, as part of the private client team, a journey of life tour within the office. And we had somebody dressed as a baby at the start of that. And they went through a pathway to get into a room. And I stood at the end of the pathway, dressed as the Grim Reaper.
Oh.
So I had the full shroud on and I had the scythe ready to go.
Why aren't you wearing that outfit today, Peter? That would have worked really well.
That would have been really fitting, wouldn't it?
Only at weekends. So at the end, when they met the Grim Reaper, given that everybody in the firm was entitled to have a will prepared for them, they got a gold coin if they'd already prepared a will, or if they hadn't, they got an admonishment and they got an appointment to make a will. And even though the people in the room were entitled to a will as part of their contract, and even though a lot of them were of my kind of vintage, less than 40% of people who
Wow.
passed us in a law firm had made a will. It's not something that you want to think about, but it showed the importance of it, and it enabled us to have a discussion about things that people don't necessarily want to discuss.
Yeah.
And that goes with divorce settlements as well. If you're asking kind of what kind of the summation of this is, what I hope is comes across is divorce settlements are to endure. There's lots of elements to them. People often think, what's it going to be like in 12 months' time? Well, you should know where you stand, but that's not the end of it. You need to know what it looks like in 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. This is your opportunity to get it right.
It's very easy to be very short-sighted about it, I think. I think you find yourself in a particularly not nice situation, and I think the kind of immediate response is, I need to get out of that situation. And like you say, it's so important to think about it long term.
And often a triumph of hope over experience.
Yeah.
You know, the experience is black swan events do happen because you're getting divorced. So it's already happened, this bad thing. That life has the habit of throwing things that way. So let's make sure that whatever we prepare is robust enough to endure that period of time. So that would be my take on this.
No, absolutely. And we always strive when making wills and sitting down with clients to do exactly that. But the advice is actually the opposite. Make a really, really robust will now, but always bear in mind that something might happen tomorrow. So keep it under review. You know, keep coming back to it. It's depressing, but keep coming back to it every 5-10 years, or when something dramatic happens. I don't mean, you know, we have the regular client that might come back to us every January after Christmas from not getting that Christmas postcard or whatever it might be. You know,
understandable, perfectly understandable.
Happens all the time. But keep it under review. I've been speaking for too long, Lucy. My throat's gone. Keep it under review. Make sure that you react to the changes in your life, be that divorce or otherwise. It's a document that can change and should change subject to your requirements. Yeah.
And if people need any help with drafting these types of wills or matrimonial advice, we're always here to support clients whenever they might need us.
Always.
All they need to do is fill out a form on our website, give us a call, we will happily help anyone. I think our next podcast is going to be along this line, but more centred around children, as we've alluded to already, which is going to be quite an important subject. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. We appreciate it.